Okay, we're back. I apologize for the technical difficulties. Can everyone see the screen? All right. So today, welcome to the second day of the Afros and Audios Podcast Festival. And we are blessed to have Stephanie Williams, who was talking about networking to grow your network. Any questions that you have, please put it in the session Q&A. And if you have time, let us know where you're from and your podcast in the chat. Take it away, Stephanie.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much, Jeannie, for that introduction. As she said, I am the host of the Mocha Minutes podcast, and I am presenting today on networking to grow your network. I think because of our little genre of entertainment or education, depending on what kind of podcast you do, networking is very important because no podcaster, no podcast show is an island. They had to work with other people. And so that sometimes requires you to do a little networking. And I know that it can be a little daunting because networking is like Diddy jumping into a pool to swim. Sometimes it doesn't look right per se, but sometimes you just have to do it. And even if you look very interesting when you do it, like Diddy, yeah, I'm sorry, that image just really just threw me away. I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. So again, this is what we're going to be talking about. And I appreciate everybody who is going to be here. I appreciate all of you taking the time to come to this session. So while we are going to be here, this is what we're going to talk about today. So this is our agenda. First is, what exactly is networking? And then we talk about some of the methods of networking. It's not the finite list. It's like rose red. It can always grow, but I just wanted to give you a few methods of networking for podcasting. The next, we're going to talk about, you have an idea of networking, and now it's time to step out on faith. It's literally like, stepping off the curb and what that can look like and what you should expect. Next, we're going to talk about some of the pros of networking, the cons of networking, and then some of once you have stepped out to do the networking, what are some of the expectations you should have? So, as Crystal and Kid Fury say, words mean things. So why don't we get a little definition going about what we're going to be talking about? So the first thing is, what exactly is a network? And so I'm somebody who likes knowledge. A lot of us here like knowledge. Let's give two different parts of speech. First, we're going to start with the noun definition of networking. And it is an association of individuals having a common interest formed to provide mutual assistance, helpful information, or the like. The verb is action, and to network is to cultivate people who can be helpful to one professionally, especially in finding employment or moving to a higher position. Now, for some of us, podcasting is not a business. However, you could still apply that to if this is just your passion project or this is just a pastime. You should still be able to network because, hey, you should always want to gain some experience and gain some expertise and also find some like-minded people to discuss your woes about editing podcasts because, well, I feel like we need a support group for people who are like, I make a podcast because, man, editing can someone feel my pain? So even if podcasting is not a business for you, it would still benefit you to have a network of people that you can commiserate and drink wine with over Zoom calls. Okay, so what exactly is networking? It is an exchange of information or services among individuals, groups, or institutions. Exchange. Another definition, the cultivation of productive relationships for employment or business. Cultivation. A supportive system of sharing information and services among individuals and groups having a common interest. Now, as you can see, I highlighted three different words: exchange, cultivation, and supportive system. Networking, especially in our space, needs all three. All three of these need to work together for you to have success in networking and also to manage your expectations. So all three of these can be used, but it would be great to use all three of these together. So let's talk about some methods of networking. So as you can see, I have a few pictures up here. It's not a, it feels like a humble brag, but it's not really a humble brag. It's just um, pictures that I've had at networking events or events that I have been to that I could use in networking. So the first method of networking is actually events. So as you can see, I have a few pictures of me at one last year's Afros and Audios, one of the best events I've ever been to. I've also been to a couple of podcast live shows. One is the Hey Frage that is in DC, and the other is the Highly Inappropriate podcast. Two podcasts that had two different live shows, but it was great experience in great meeting other like-minded people. So, first one that I just talked about is festivals. Uh, you may not think that a festival is a networking event, but it can be. And I know it's probably a little bit different now that we're sitting here all virtually at a festival. And you're probably like, this is not a great way to network. Pre-Rona, during festivals, you have breakout sessions, you have breaks, you have lunch breaks, you have intermissions. And so that was always a good way, especially at festivals and in-person events, where you can actually just interact with people that are near you. Or if you hear someone ask a question during another session, Q&A, you're like, oh, I want to talk to that person because they seem interesting. So these kind of events definitely yield networking events. So it's not only for festivals, especially podcast festivals, it's not just to improve your knowledge in podcasting. It's a good way to mix and mingle. So workshops are also a good way. Conferences and cocktail hours. And there's a difference between cocktail hours and happy hours. I put them two different. There's a little bit of difference if you're someone who imbibes like I do. There's a difference between a cocktail hour and a happy hour. But all five of these different events are great ways to reach out to people. They're a great way to find like-minded people. I'm someone with, we're now sitting in a pandemic and a lot of us have been in Zoom rooms and Zoom calls. And sometimes you think that's not a way that I can meet people or interact with people, that's not going to happen. So I can give you a good example of maybe like a happy hour, but it was called a kickback. And I was sitting there going, I don't know if I'm going to be able to meet like-minded people. I don't know if I'm going to find anyone. So the podcast Tea with Queen and Jay, they typically have an in-person kickback for Juneteenth. Because of Rona, they had a virtual one and where they had a Zoom room. Now, as someone who has used Zoom in the past, I did not realize how big a Zoom room can actually get. But there is a feature in Zoom where you can chat with other people. So everybody that was in this kickback was able to interact with everyone else. And then you can actually message people privately. So if you are laughing and kikiing and, basically touching and agreeing with somebody that's in the chat room, you can actually reach out to them directly and say, hey, let's connect. I really like your energy. So even though we're talking virtually at this point, it's still a good way to reach out to people. So don't hinder yourself by saying, oh, it's a Zoom room, I'm not going to be able to interact with people. You'll be surprised what goes down in the chat room. Because one, this is new to everybody else too. Another method of networking are online groups. So I think many of us here are probably in at least one online group, at least maybe one. They may be in several different ones because you're like, oh, I need to network. I need to get myself out there. So the first type of networking online group are probably the most popular one are Facebook groups. So if you were to type in podcast right now into Facebook, you would come up with a ton of Facebook groups. Now, we know that sometimes Facebook can be a little Mm, at times. However, there are many groups that can help you expand your network. Podcast groups are, especially the ones on Facebook, are some of the places where I've not only met some great collaborators, some great content creators, I've made some great friends. Podcast groups are usually filled with people who have the like-mindedness of what they want to do, especially if you're going there for podcasting. There's a group for literally everything on Facebook, but definitely for podcast groups, there are a lot. So the three that I have pictured here are the three that, and mind you, I'm in more than three. I can almost guarantee you that, but I'm in maybe about 6, 7, or 8. So the three that I'm probably the most active in, one is Black Podcasters United, uh, because that's the other thing. We're all Black or people of color podcasters, and sometimes the larger majority, aka white podcast groups, you may feel a little uneasy. I'm not saying don't network in there and don't meet people. It's just um, I found more richness in the podcast groups that are geared towards people who look like me. So that's why I definitely big them up. There are a lot. Podcast Movement has one. There's a lot of larger podcast groups that incorporate that have white people in there. I'm not telling anyone not to join those. Just gird your loins, as they would say. So I am a part of the Black Podcasters United. I am a part of um, the Women of Color Podcasters, or WALK, if anybody is in that one as well. And I'm also in Podcasting While Black. So the great thing about all of these groups is that podcast groups also bring you together with people who may not necessarily be in your niche. If you are somebody who's maybe doing a travel podcast, you can meet someone who is doing a sports podcast, and you will be surprised how much you have in common with someone who is not in your niche. It shouldn't be a hindrance. You're like, oh, I can only join Black Travel Podcasters Group. I'm pretty sure they're out there, but definitely to increase your network and to increase your base, I definitely would say just join a general podcast group and find like-minded people, because you will be surprised how many people are either not in your niche and you would have something in common with, or someone who's in your niche and you can actually bounce ideas all off of. So I will tell you, when it comes to the Facebook groups, a lot of them are private because they want to definitely cultivate these spaces, and some of them can be secret. So the difference, if anybody is not familiar, the difference between private and secret. Private, you can actually search for in Facebook. Secret ones, literally, so it's a secret, so you can't search for it, and someone who's in the group would have to invite you for it. So that's the biggest difference between those two. The next is LinkedIn. So LinkedIn may be better for folks who are doing podcasting as a business. You can still, if it's a passion and a pastime, you can still find like-minded people on LinkedIn. But for people who are like, podcasting is my business, they may see a lot more benefit in LinkedIn. Another is Meetup. So for anybody who's not familiar with Meetup, meetup.com, Meetup was a place where, for people who are like, I want to meet up, essentially meet people. So it was basically just for social, like, oh, I am someone who likes happy hour and I meet some people for happy hour. Because podcasting has, I'm glad that Queen and Jay said this last year when it said it's not saturated. It's just more. And the thing about it is, it's hundreds of thousands of podcasts. So you have to meet people some way. So on Meetup, the screenshot that I have here in the slide is literally just the podcasts that were surround me. I just put in podcast, and I think I opened it up to maybe nationwide. So these are some of the podcast groups that are already, podcast meetups, I should say, that are already formed. And also in the middle, you can actually just form your own. So if you are someone who's like, oh, I see this podcast, but I want this kind of podcast group, you can always create one on Meetup. That's the best thing about Meetup, is that you can either go to one that's already in existence, or you can create your own. And you will be surprised who is like, oh my God, thank you. Someone is making a Black podcast meetup group, because man, I can't find anybody else. Another networking opportunity for you. And the last one that I wanted to highlight is the network memberships. So I mentioned the Facebook group, Women of Color or WAP Podcasters. They also have an online network membership. So on their website, they have a membership. You can either do it yearly or monthly, and you can get not only an online knowledge base, you could, which will help your podcast expertise. They also have co-working sessions, they have social events, they have trainings, and they have accountability calls. Now, this would also help your networking to build your network as well, because then you can start finding either people who are similar to you, someone in your area, and someone like-minded with you, or a little bit of all three. So those are some different ways on how you can use online groups to improve your networking. The next method, the last couple of methods may seem a little bit unorthodox, but I still want you to follow me. So the first one I'm going to talk about is word of mouth. And that may seem like a little bit weird. You're like, how is word of mouth a way to network? Well, I can give you an example for our realm when it comes to guesting on a podcast, because essentially that is a networking opportunity. You are guest co-hosting on a podcast. So you are guest co-host A. Listener Q hears you on the podcast and likes the energy that you bring to the podcast. So listener Q goes to podcast host and says, hey, who is that person that you were on with? I like them. Because listener Q is not just a listener Q is also a podcaster. So they say, hey, tell me about that person. So podcast host says, oh, this is so-and-so. This is their podcast. This is their social media handles. Oh, reach out to them. They're really cool, really good energy, really good to work with. And then all of a sudden, listener Q is reaching out to podcast co-host A to work with them. That can be a networking opportunity, especially if it's someone who is not necessarily in your niche, but enjoys hearing the conversation. Because a lot of times for energy, when it comes, especially for us, we hear energy, we're like, oh, I like that energy. I like what they brought. So then you're all set, like, oh, yeah, I like them. And that will lead to the second unorthodox in the DMs. Now, sometimes on social media, especially Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, any other social media platform you use, a lot of people say, hey, if you would like to be on the show, is there somebody you're looking for in the show? If you have ideas on this, shoot me and if people say either leave me or shoot me a PM or a DM. Now, depending on who you're talking to, PM may be showing my age because a lot of people don't use PM anymore because they're like, you mean at night? So PM is private message me or personal message me, and DM is direct message. But a lot of people, because hey, the song is a bop, a lot of people just say DM. So you may not hear PM so much. However, a lot of networking opportunities can happen in the DMs. I am someone, especially when you're in, and I keep highlighting the Facebook groups because it's such a great way to network because it expands not only the people in your niche, but also the geography of your network can grow. I'm someone who's in Maryland, and I know a lot of podcasters who are on the West Coast. I know a lot of people who are in the Midwest, and I know some people that are further south. Guys, Maryland is south. We are below the Mason-Dixie line. We're just more northern south than everybody else. But people who are down the south. So because of Facebook groups, I've been able to reach them that I probably would never even met if we weren't in the same Facebook group together. So that's why I keep highlighting Facebook groups. It's not a plug. Mark Zuckerberg is not paying me. So that's the only reason why I keep mentioning it. But I've met a few people in the Facebook group, and people are in a lot of these Facebook groups. You probably see posts that asking for collaborators. So sometimes I'm not necessarily looking for a collaborator, but if I know the person that's looking, I'm like, hey, I have a good person for you. So this is a typical thing that I may do, especially if I see two people that I know or a group of people that would be a good fit. If I'm all Facebook friends with them, I will add them all to a messenger group, introduce them all like, Larry, this is Kevin. Kevin, this is Larry. And then I say, okay, you guys are all set up to meet. I will politely move myself out, and then that's a networking opportunity. A really good buddy of mine who is an editor, he's a really great editor and graphic designer. Um, I helped a podcaster who's looking for a graphic designer, set them up. And then this podcaster started going into politics and was running for a political office. He helped her with her website. Now, that went beyond podcasting, but it was a relationship that has been cultivated and has been worked on just based off on a initial conversation. So a lot of things can happen in the DMs. You can meet really good people, and you can set up a meet, and that's it. So if you hook up to people or a group of people and the energy may not be what you're expecting, don't think that you did something wrong or it was like, oh, I should have never did that. It's like, you can have a good idea. They're not all good ideas. Sometimes they fall flat, but it doesn't mean you should stop doing what you're doing. So the DMs, fun place to to network. So now that you have an idea that you are going to, I'm going to start networking because I want to get my podcast voice out there. I want to get my podcast out there, period. I want to meet more people. I want more people from my community. If it's Black women, if it is, it is queer Black men, is it queer Black women, it is trans, it is non-binary. You're like, okay, I want to get out there because I want to meet more people. So now you're going to like, I'm going to take the plunge and I'm going to network. Sometimes you may not look at it. You're just like, I'm getting my voice out there. That is essentially networking. Now you're like, oh, what do I do? Like, what is stepping off the curb? So the first thing, if you're signing up for an event, you're signing up for a happy hour, if you're signing up, if you're just joining the group, first thing, do your research. Sometimes when you sign up for these things, you aren't sure the people that is going, you're like, who all is going to be there? It's okay to do your research. It's okay to ask questions. Research can be doing a Google, especially if you're going to a festival, you're going to a conference, you're going to a workshop, do your research, do your Googles. And you can also, if you're in other groups and you actually know other podcasters, ask them if they've ever heard of it. They're like, hey, have you ever heard of this? Have you ever heard of this person? What do you know? So it's always good to start and do your research. The next is build a connection. So, woo, man, oh man. You also, networking opportunities are relationships, and relationships take work. It's not just a plug and play sometimes. Sometimes it is. Depending on the energy between you and the other person, it can be plug and play. But sometimes you have to build the connection. You have to, like, you sign up for the event. If you see some of the people, just kind of start building on this. Like, hey, I can't wait to see everybody there. Oh, this looks like this is going to be a good time. Can't wait to see everybody. That's starting the building. That's the nice little foundation you could get. So by the time you get there, you're like, hey, I remember that name. Hey, I remember that face. The next is value the connections that you are going to make. If you go into networking just saying, I'm going to get something, then that is going to be a stop for you. It should never be just, I'm just going to get something out of it. You should be willing to put something into it. The next is check your energy. So we are right now in a pandemic, and there is a such thing that is affecting a lot of people called pandemic anxiety, pandemic depression. So even though we're in a pandemic, it's still opportunities to network, but you should also check your energy. It's okay if you are like, I'm a little off and I don't have the right energy for this right now. It's like, it's okay for you to say that. Don't ever think that you're like, I have to be on, I have to do, I have to push. It's like, no, you don't. Check your energy and make sure that you're in the right headspace, because you don't want to go into an opportunity for networking with the wrong headspace and throw somebody off and they're like, oh, I don't like the way she was moving. I don't know what's going on. Because first impressions are everything. They're not going to know that you're just off because that's their first impression. So definitely make sure that you have the right energy that you're going into, because you don't ever want to throw someone off because you're just not right. And your feelings are valid if you are, and I'm someone who's big on mental health, so I'm like, your feelings are valid and it's okay for you to take a break, honestly. The next is polish your listening skills. So when you are networking, it's definitely important to listen, not just waiting for someone to stop talking. Because there's a difference between hearing and listening. So you can hear when a person stops talking, but if you're listening, you can hear why they have stopped talking. So definitely polish up all those skills on let me listen to certain things, especially if you're listening to someone who is talking about what kind of podcasts they listen to, what kind of things they like. If you're someone who is doing an interview podcast and you're listening to someone who enjoys uh, like audio storytelling, they may not be the person that you're like, oh, let me network with them. I'm still going to network with them, but I hear what kind of things they like and you know what you like. So definitely take the time to listen when people are talking. That goes a long way. So, what are some of the pros of networking? Now, I've said all of this and it may seem like it's daunting. Putting yourself out there can be a little bit daunting, but there are rewards to that. So, some of the pros, it grows your audience. In podcasting, the name of the game is getting your name out there, getting your show out there. Guesting on other podcasts can also grow your audience, but sometimes other podcasters are also people who love podcasting. A lot of podcasters listen to other podcasts. If a podcast likes you, they'll mention you. Their audience will go, wait a minute, why do you keep mentioning this person? Why do you keep mentioning Diamond Styles, Stephanie? Why do you keep mentioning her? Why do you keep mentioning Marsha? Okay, let me go start listening to Marsha's Plate. For anybody in this room who is the Black Guy Who Tips listener, you'll probably know at least 3 or 4 other podcasts they've listened to because they listen to other podcasts. Hence why I listen to Tea with Queen and Jay, why I listen to Medium Popcorn, why I was blown away when Keith and the girls started following me on Instagram. I'm like, oh my God, this is just great, incredible. So networking, once you get people, once they start liking you, they talk about you because I talk a lot of podcasts on my podcast. So the next is it grows your expertise. Wherever you are in your podcast journey, because this is a marathon, this is not a race, you can meet someone who may be either a little bit ahead of you or probably started at the same time. Um, Networking doesn't mean that you only network with people who are at your expertise level. That means you network with everyone. So you will be amazed how many podcasters are podcast editors, they are video directors, they are podcast network owners. Festivals like the Afros and Audios is where you will find them. They will help you to level up. I will give you a quick story. I showed a picture of a podcast called Python that was founded by 2 women of color podcasters. So one of the organizers named Lee, she is someone who is very meticulous. She is about detail, which is something that is just amazing. So she made it a point to talk to all of the presenters and say, hey, can we get like a logistics call? This is a week or so before all of this, the Python was happening. So she wanted to meet with everyone. So I'm still like maybe like 2 years into my podcast journey. So she was able to sit with me. And when she saw my setup, she said, okay, this is what we're going to do. She was assertive and she was not aggressive. She was assertive and she was about her business. And of course, when someone is giving you critique, sometimes it's not comfortable. So it also makes you feel like, oh my gosh, should I even be here? I feel like I'm not ready. However, take in the criticism, especially if you know it's coming from a good place. It's not coming from a, let me just throw salt on you. I'm trying to help you get better. So I know because of meeting with Lee and talking to Lee, I know I'm a better podcaster and I'm better with my setup just by talking to her. So networking, and I met her in the Women of Color podcaster group. That's how I met her. So it's kind of like now I have someone that I could talk to about things, especially visual. If I need to talk to her about attire, if I need to talk to her about presentation, I know I can reach out to Lee. because she has a wealth of information about that. The next is gaining friends and confidants. This seems so after school special, so Disney, but it's true. Um, I think that is the fun side of networking, especially if you are networking for business. Sometimes you're like, oh, this is just business and it's fine. But the best part about the positive part of that, sometimes you can gain friends. And sometimes you just click and sometimes you just form a bond. So there are many podcasts out there that are done by people who are already friends. We've seen it. Some podcasts have been brought to fruition because one or two or three people met and they just clicked. It just worked. You will find friends in this world of podcasting, and that will make it better because when you find friends and people that you can trust with, your insecurities or you feel like hashtag your podcast fails, it's a good feeling where you can commiserate with someone going, oh my gosh, this is what happened. I forgot to press record on my podcast and now I have to record it all over again. And you'll find somebody go, oh girl, that happened to me too. Man, it sucks. But dust yourself off. You'll find somebody who's in your corner and who wants to support you. Another pro is getting fresh ideas and perspective. Uh, Podcasting is a ever evolving place. So definitely don't think like, oh, the way you start out is not the way you're probably going to do it now. I'm a podcaster. There's many a podcaster who have been podcasting one way when they started, definitely don't podcast the same way they do now. So, and that is also going by networking. It's maturing, but it's maturing in podcasting as opposed to just getting older. But if you have a network of good people, they'll give you fresh ideas. So, two people, and I think one of these people probably don't know this, but I got fresh ideas and perspective from two people. One, Diamond Styles from Marshall's Plate. The other is Rashani from the Single Simulcast. So Rashani introduced me to the world of Google Docs because it is a live document and it's an ever-flowing document. And that also is a window for your guests to actually be involved in the show as well. They can give you their information, the contact information. They also put notes and they can see like, so I may not be comfortable talking about this. Can we not? It's like, yeah, cool. Because that actually still adds to the conversation. What Diamond taught me about was recording an intro. At that point, when I was podcasting, I was like trying to rattle off an intro every time, and I was trying to make sure I got everything. I talked about everything, and I was listening to her podcast, and I went, "She recorded this early. Oh my God, that's genius!" It's like this is amazing, and I don't think I know I've told Rashani, but I don't think I've ever told Diamond that. I told her about my love about white cheddar Cheez-Its, but I didn't tell her about that. And so I feel like I should. And another pro is building your confidence. I think when you are someone who podcasts out of your home or maybe out of your closet or maybe out of a studio, you're not around a lot of people when you do it, especially if you're podcasting like a lot of us are in our homes and by ourselves. We're not really around other people. You're like, am I doing okay? Is this working for me? And networking help you build your confidence, especially if people in your network listen to your show. They're like, no, you sound good. It's like, so if you feel like you need something else, I'm like, what do you think you need? It's a good way to build your confidence. Like, oh my gosh. It's like, how do I get to the next level? And your network can help you do that. So this is not fun, but with pros, there are some cons, and it might not be the cons that you think of, and they're very varied. So the first is networking is time intensive. It is the long game. It just takes time and energy to network. And it just takes time. And I think some of us, we're in a society where it's microwave and it's like everything has to be, we want everything instantly. And for podcasting and networking, that is not necessarily going to happen. The next is it is labor intensive. So for people who do a lot of networking, they do a lot of events, festivals, happy hours, cocktail hours, Zoom calls. They know that this is a lot. It is a lot of labor. It's a lot of labor intensive. You have to put a lot into it. And when I mean labor, I'm not just talking about physical labor. I'm talking about emotional labor and mental labor. You have to be in a good mindset to network, especially now when you're on a Zoom call and everybody can see your face and everybody can see your expression. So that's where checking your energy before you actually, take that leap to go helps you to realize like, ooh, am I ready for that labor? The next is rejection. That's one of the cons of networking. Sometimes we just don't like to hear no. So we're like, oh no, it's like rejection. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear no. I don't want Rod and Karen to tell me no. I'm like, oh my gosh. So it sucks. So fear of rejection can really hinder you from getting yourself out there to network because you'll feel like I don't belong there. So I don't want to hear no. I don't know what I'd do if I were hear no. But you got to fight through that because your voice is important in this space. So, hey, y'all. It's expensive to network. It can be, a lot of with Zoom, it's like a lot of them are free. Some of them are not. A lot of like festivals like this, like at different conferences, workshops, it may be some cost to it. If you're going to happy hours and cocktail hours, there's some cost to it. It's not, so you may have to weigh your options. You may have to see like, can I go to this? Well, I can go to this, but I'm not going to be able to go to South by Southwest this year, or I may not be able to go to a podcast movement because it's not in my city. I'm like, you got to think about, you know, travel arrangements. You got to think about hotels. You have to think about ground travel. So you have to weigh your options. So that may be a con for people who are like, oh, I want to go to networking, but I don't have the coins to do that. You have to weigh your options, and you also can lean on your network and those kind of things. But sometimes knowing the expense may stop you from just doing it, period. The next, and I know a lot of podcasters have been doing this a long time, they'll tell you about imposter syndrome. It may feel like, oh, I don't, it's major in our world because we think of, the big podcasts. You think if you're a podcaster, you got to be a Tabria Majors, you got to be a Jada XD, you got to be a Crystal and Kipfer, you got to be a Rod and Karen, you got to be a Mr. Span, you got to be these people to actually fit into the world of podcasting, and you don't. And it's like, because you got to bring yourself, because all of them will tell you just be yourself. They're like, how did you get here? I was myself, but I also realized this has worked. Authenticity is also the name of the game. So you have to always just be yourself. The next thing is, it is not a light switch. It is not instant at all. Networking. If you're networking, I'm gonna go to one festival, I'm gonna go to one happy hour, and then bam, I'm on. That's not how. It's not how this works. It's not how any of this works. Unfortunately, I wish it did, but it didn't. The folks that I have been listening to and mentioning so far, they busted their butts and they networked. They worked. It's work to put in. They put in the work. They worked with other people. They networked. They built their network of people around them. So then if stuff hits the fan, technology has failed us. We are all at home. So internet has failed you. We're looking at you, Xfinity. So that way you have a network that you can piggyback off, because one, podcasting is a grind, it's a climb, and so is networking. So one networking event does not mean you will be signed to Spotify tomorrow, but there's beauty in this journey. The last con is it may not give you the results that you're looking for. You may think, if you're thinking that, oh, one event and I'm on, and then it doesn't happen, you'll be like, oh, then I'm not going to network anymore because I didn't just get to guest on the read, and like, why am I even doing this? It's just one thing, but got to keep going. It's like, if you're like going into, it's like, it's going to be this, like, sorry. So managing expectations. Now that you've networked, you got to look at it, because it could be a dance between taking a leap and the pros and the cons. All of this is wrapped up into managing expectations. Networking is part of the grind. If this is what you want to do, if you want to get to higher heights, then this is part of the gig. It's part of the job. If you want to get more out there, you got to work with other people. You can't be in a silo. You're not on an island. There's no possible way. You will be more visible. So if you're someone who is No one at your job knows that you're podcasting, and then you have a podcast, and people find out, and then people are like, "Wait, are you talking about me on your podcast?" Wait, you're going to be more visible. It may not be that big where everybody at your job, but you'll be amazed where podcasters like, "Oh, someone in my job just found out I did a podcast. This is going to be awkward," but maybe it's not because they're like, "I really like your podcast," especially if they're a coworker that you're cool with. They're like, "I really like what you said on last week's episode," so that can help them. Networking is not just for extroverts, and I know it's probably easy for me to say this because I am an extrovert. But there are many people in this podcast space who are introverts who also network. So, and they just compartmentalize it and realize that this is part of it. So they may store up all of their energy for that one event, and as soon as it's over, shut it down and go back to what they were doing. So it's not just for people who are like I am and other people who are, because just like there are a lot of extroverts in the podcast space, you will be surprised how many introverts there are. The next is be prepared to hear no. This is different than just rejection. This is just letting you know that no one has to say yes to you because you're just there. It's just be prepared to hear no. Because sometimes no is not because your podcast is not good. It's not because that you're doing something wrong. Sometimes the person that's hearing it may just not have time. It's like, I like your idea, but right now I just can't work with you right now. It has nothing to do with you. Sometimes people have to say no because a lot of times for podcasting, especially when we're grinding, we don't put boundaries on. And sometimes saying no is a boundary for that person because they're checking their energy and they're like, okay, I need to start saying no to things. So it's never personal if someone says no to you. And I know it seems weird to bounce it off of the con of rejection, but having that in the back of your mind is like, I'm going to put myself out there. I may hear no, and that may be okay. It has no bearing on the content that you create. Another thing, you may have to be the person to make the first move. If you go to a networking event, don't expect that you're going to sit on your throne and everyone's going to be bringing a chicken to your court. You may have to bring the chicken. So you may have to make the first move. Be prepared for that. Be prepared to go up to the person whose podcast you had listened to the week before where she said she doesn't really like hugging strangers. So when you see her at Afros and Audios and she is off in the corner eating her food, you may be like, hey, I'm a big fan, but I heard you when you said you don't like hugs, so I'm not going to hug you. And then she'll laugh. And then when you see her later with her co-host, Janicia, she gets a hug. I'm like, y'all, I'm going to tell everybody for the rest of my life that Queen hugged me and she don't like hugging people. So there's that. Another thing, networking is give and take. And I think I've alluded to this throughout all of this, that you got to give and take. You're not just networking, the other person is networking too. They might be like, hey, what do you bring? I want to get to know you. So realize that you can take a lot, but you can also give a lot too. So don't ever think that you can't bring anything to the table. So I know I've talked a lot. So in conclusion about networking, to grow your network, it promotes growth. It promotes growth in you as a person. It promotes growth in your audience. It promotes growth in your show. Because the longer you podcast and you're realizing like, hey, maybe I should change up how I talk. Maybe I should change up the way that my show flows. Maybe I could grow and listen to other people telling me things. The next, it keeps your podcast fresh. So it promotes growth and also keeps your podcast fresh because a lot of times you may network with people who do things a little bit different than you or do things the same or have been doing it longer and saying, hey man, I had to go away from calling women females. I had to grow from that because man, I used to call them females all the time. And it was until I started listening to women podcasters that I went, oh man, maybe I shouldn't call women females. Networking is a door. Either it's a door you're walking into or a door you're opening to someone else. And it is a process. It's like it's not just an easy thing, one and done thing. It's a process. It may be you go to this event, you go to a happy hour, you go to a cocktail hour, you go into the DMs, you go in the group. It's a process. It's a lot going on at the same time. I think I am So, right now, anybody have any questions? I talked a lot.
I have some questions that are in the chat. So,
Ooh,
what is one thing that holds you back from networking?
ooh. Feeling like you don't, one is definitely feeling like you don't belong. Feeling like your podcast is not good enough because you're sitting in your closet while you do it, as opposed to sitting in a studio and having someone else edit it. You may feel like you just don't belong, or you may feel like no one's gonna say yes to me, or no one's gonna want to talk to me. It's a lot. Sometimes it's a lot more personal than whatever the networking event is or what the networking opportunity is. The more we like, I don't think I'm good enough because, and I'm speaking from personal experience. I'm like, I'm not good enough. I shouldn't do this. And then you find out when you get there, you're like, man, why didn't I do this before?
Okay. So, I have a question about LinkedIn networking.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you talk about LinkedIn networking, are we just talking about posting? We're talking about friending people. How do you actually network on LinkedIn?
So I think networking on LinkedIn is a little bit tricky because there aren't really like, so there are groups, but it's not like big groups. So it literally is like friending and following people on LinkedIn. So it's kind of like, oh, like, because you know how they say first, second, or third? It's like, wait, how do I know this person? Oh, because you're friends with this person. It's, oh, okay, okay. So it's more interpersonal than like a big group opportunity. But a lot of people do use LinkedIn messaging, which is very interesting when you see a message from someone. You're like, wait, who are you? How did you find me, person in the computer?
Okay. Okay, so next question is, how do you handle your imposter syndrome?
Ooh, deep breaths. Deep breaths is the first thing. The other thing is it takes time. It's kind of like if I was going to a podcast festival after 3 months, I probably would be literally like, I have to look a certain way. I have to have like these shiny new cards. I have to do this, and this. Uh, but managing it is definitely having self confidence in yourself and actually liking your product and your content and your show. If you are like, I don't think my show is good enough, that's going to read all over your face. That's going to read on how you interact with people. So if you are like, oh, I'm not good enough because I don't have like sound bites and I don't have a fancy intro and I don't do this with my show, then you're going to think your show is trash and it's not. Or you're going to think you as a podcaster are trash and you are not. Because podcasting is about personalities because it's mostly audio. So it's like people have to hear it in your voice. So if you're sitting here like, oh, I'm not great, it's like, okay, that's going to read. We're going to be able to sense that. So I've had to fight through that because I think there are not a lot of, now that I've been listening to more podcasts. At the time when I started my podcast, I didn't hear a lot of Black women like lead hosting. I didn't hear a lot of Black women. I heard like podcasts where it was a man and a woman, but typically the woman was the co-host, but not the main host. And I was like, I don't hear anybody look like me, so maybe they won't like want a fat Black woman talking about podcasting. I'm just saying. Like, girl, if you don't go, leave us alone. Go fix daddy a sandwich. Be quiet. Get out of here.
Okay, so Donna wants to know, is there one method of networking that will give you the best bang for your time when you are in a
Mm.
busy personal season, if that makes sense?
In a busy personal season, probably the online, because one, you can reach. It's a For online, especially like the Facebook groups. I think that will give you the best bang, especially when you know you're super busy. Because if you're super busy, you can't travel to like a cocktail hour or a conference when you're like, girl, I work 6 out of 7 days of the week. There's no way I can take off a weekend to go to Afros and Audios in New York. I can't do that. So the online groups, the LinkedIn's, definitely the Facebook groups, that probably will be better for you because then you can also talk to other people that may not, excuse me, that may not be in your city, maybe on the West Coast, maybe Central, maybe South. So that way it would definitely be someone who is very busy, especially if you say you're an accountant, you're a CPA by trade, and you are still podcasting during tax season, which may the odds ever be in your favor during tax season. If you're a CPA, you trying to podcast, it's like, girl, you better take that break. Just saying. But Facebook groups will be where you should lean towards.
Okay. And Latrice has a question. If you want to work with someone or partner with them, how soon after meeting them should you ask? All right, Latrice. Also, I'm always weird about just jumping straight in, but I also don't want to miss the window of opportunity.
So that I would lean more towards how did your initial interaction go? Because you don't want to be the person where you met someone 7 months ago and then you message them looking like one of your high school friends that are trying to sell you a pyramid scheme. You don't want to do that either. So I think you can base it on how the interaction goes. If you want to wait like a day or so, or if you were like, "Oh, I just met you tonight," especially if because a lot of people are like, here are my handles, here's my social medias. This is where, especially if you friend them the same night, you can say, "Oh, it was really good to talk to you. It's like I really liked your energy and it was cool." So you have to base it on what the initial interaction was. Some people like jump right ahead. It's like, "Hey, I'm looking for collaborators." 3 seconds later, "Oh, I see you had it." It's like, I haven't even like finished letting it load on my Facebook. How did you get here so quickly? So some people are overzealous, and sometimes, especially if you're excited, you're like, "Oh my gosh, this person's in a group. Oh, I can work with them." But you have to balance, and that balance is really hard to do if you're like, "Oh, I really want to get myself out there and network." But that also can read, especially if you're literally messaging every person the exact same way. They're like, "Oh, did Jason? Oh, did he give you the same paragraph, girl? He gave that to me too." It's like, because sometimes that can read as inauthentic, even if you don't mean it that way. So definitely gauge a little bit the energy before you go up. 2 feet in, let's go. Looking like the Diddy flop, not the Diddy dive. Man, Diddy, you went out sad. I need to stop doing that to Diddy. He gonna come after me.
Okay. At networking events, what do you think you bring to the table? So for some of us who are introverts, we tend to be on the quiet
Mm,
side.
hmm
What does that look like?
So, mm, I can think of a podcast right now, a podcast host right now, and he's an introvert, and it's so funny because I'm like, really? But when you see him podcast, he's so engaging, so it's always interesting. Um, I think I have noticed people who are introverts, they are very laid back, and I kind of seek them out. So I may not be the first person to ask, but there's somebody who is a little bit quiet. But once you engage them in conversation, you actually see like, "Oh, I like you. I like you." And sometimes it may be just somebody pulling them along and say, "Hey, have you met this person? Have you met this? Have you met Jeannie? Jeannie knows this, that, hither and yon about editing. Have you met her yet?" "Oh no." And then everybody wants to talk to them. So when you're an introvert, I've noticed that some just kind of hang back and observe. And that actually that may be a strength because you can actually notice things that someone who's extroverted and who's bubbly and who's like a bee going to different flowers, they may not notice that. They may be like, wait, what are you doing?"
Okay, well, this is it is now 11:58. The session's over in 2 minutes. If anyone has any other questions, please quickly drop them. But if not, Stephanie has been a blessing.
Oh, thank you.
Networking
Yeah,
is
and Stephanie, go ahead and let everybody know how they can get in touch with you if they wanted to network with you directly.
Oh, absolutely. Latrice, I have the slide, honey. But this is the Mocha Minutes podcast. There's a few places where you can find it.
You have to
But if you
reshare your screen again.
Oh, I have to reshare my screen. What? Latrice, you didn't tell me I have to reshare my screen, child. Bam, here we go. So if you would like to get in touch with me, I'm the host of the Mocha Minutes podcast. You can either email me at mochaminutes@gmail.com or these are all my social media handles. There's the same on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. It is Mocha Minutes, but definitely reach out. My DMs are definitely open. So definitely reach out
It's
if
not
you
your
definitely
screen
want to
not
kind of.
showing, but we could hear you though.
You can't see my screen?
No, it's black.
What?
But that's all right, girl. We got you at the there you go at the Mocha Minutes.
There you go. Because I was like, I know I pushed the button. See? Here we go. Kanye West to my daggone technology child. How you going to do it then? Shh. Don't Kanye West this up. Don't Lil Wayne it. See, I need to stop shading. I need to stop shading all these rappers. They be like, what you mean? I thought you liked us. I'm like, listen here, Water Nuggets. You on my list.
Listen. Thank you so much, Stephanie. You did an amazing job. You gave us some great information. And I know I'm going to, all y'all up in that chat, y'all better be answering my DMs because I'm going to be DMing some of y'all. Okay. Because I'm
She
trying to
really will be,
network and do
y'all.
some
I'm
things.
sorry. I'm sorry, y'all.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
she will.
Don't play me. Don't play me like you don't know me for real in real life.
And y'all hear this
okay?
accent, so y'all gonna want her to DM you. It's like,
You know
oh,
what I'm
y'all hear it,
saying?
y'all hear it,
You
right?
know, or DM me if that's what you want to do. You know what I'm saying? Thank you so much, Stephanie. Y'all
Thank
enjoy your
you.
lunch. We'll see you right back at 1:30 for our next general session.